Imagine waking up one morning, believing your life is finally about to change, believing that the ranch your late grandfather left you, the land that carried generations of sweat, sacrifice, and memories, was waiting for you to step in and claim it. Imagine the smell of fresh earth, the creak of the old wooden gate, the echo of your grandfather's voice telling you that this land was your birthright. Now imagine arriving at that ranch only to find strangers living there, fences replaced, locks changed, and a smug woman standing at the gate with folded arms, telling you that she sold it because the HOA decided it was abandoned. That's where my story begins. And if you think this is just another tale of bureaucracy gone wrong, you're dead wrong. Because what happened next was not about paperwork, not about lawyers, not about police. It was about me, my rage, and my revenge. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the end because Karen didn't see it coming. I had been preparing for months to move into the ranch. Every night, I'd picture myself walking through the fields, restoring the barn, bringing life back to the place that had been neglected since my grandfather passed. It wasn't just property, it was legacy, it was blood, it was the only thing tying me to my roots. But when I pulled up with my truck, I saw a for sale sign already pulled out of the ground, fresh tire marks on the driveway, and a family unloading boxes into what was supposed to be my home. My heart stopped. I thought maybe I was at the wrong place, maybe GPS had glitched. But no, the mailbox still had my grandfather's name etched into it. That's when she appeared. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, the woman who believed every inch of land fell under her HOA kingdom. She smirked, holding a clipboard, and said, "Oh, you must be the grandson. Too late, we sold it last week. HOA rules. You weren't here, so we assumed abandonment." My blood boiled. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. I told her we weren't even HOA members, that this land was private, inherited, untouchable. She laughed. "Not anymore. We made the call. It's done. If you don't leave, I'll call 911. And she did, right there in front of me, dialing with her manicured fingers, pretending she was the victim. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't going to be solved with lawyers or police. This was personal. This was war. The officers arrived, but they didn't care. They saw paperwork Karen shoved in their faces, documents stamped with HOA nonsense, and they told me to take it up with the courts. Karen stood behind them smirking, whispering loud enough for me to hear, "He's just bitter. He lost. He's nobody." That word, nobody, echoed in my head like a gunshot. I drove away that day, but I didn't leave defeated. I left plotting, because Karen thought she had won, but she didn't understand the kind of man my grandfather raised me to be. He taught me patience, he taught me resilience, and he taught me that when someone takes what's yours, you don't beg, you take it back. For weeks, I watched. I parked my truck on the edge of the property at night, lights off, engine silent. I studied the new family, innocent pawns in Karen's game. They didn't know the truth. They thought they had bought a ranch fair and square. My anger wasn't at them. It was at her. She was the spider, weaving lies, pulling strings, feeding off control. I saw her visit often, strutting around like she owned the place, barking orders, telling them where to plant, how to paint, even how to mow. She thrived on power. But power makes people careless, and Karen was careless. She left trails, documents in her car, conversations overheard, neighbors whispering about how she manipulated sales, pocketed money, and bullied anyone who resisted. I collected everything, every word, every slip, every weakness. Revenge isn't about rage, it's about precision, and I was precise. The first step was psychological. I wanted Karen to feel the same fear she tried to instill in me. Late at night, I left notes on her porch, not threats, reminders. You don't own what isn't yours. Legacies don't die. The land remembers. She dismissed them at first, laughing, waving them at neighbors, but then I escalated. I carved symbols in the dirt outside her house, symbols my grandfather used to mark boundaries. She woke up to find them glowing under moonlight, lit with candles I placed strategically. She started locking her doors, closing her blinds, jumping at shadows.
Good. Fear was the seed. Next came isolation. I spread whispers among neighbors, subtle truths about her corruption. People started questioning her authority, refusing her demands, ignoring her HOA letters. She lost grip. Her empire cracked, and when she was most vulnerable, I struck. One night, I broke into the ranch, not to steal, but to reclaim. I walked through the halls, touching the walls my grandfather built, smelling the wood, hearing echoes of the past. The family was asleep, unaware. I left a letter on the kitchen table explaining the truth, attaching copies of inheritance papers, proof that Karen had no right. I didn't ask them to leave. I told them they were victims too, and the justice was coming. Then I left, but not before planting something Karen couldn't ignore. In her car, I slipped a folder filled with evidence of her fraud, her illegal sales, her pocketed money. When she found it, she panicked. She knew someone was watching, someone knew everything, and that someone wasn't going to stop. Karen tried to fight back. She called 911 again, screaming about harassment, about being stalked. But this time, the officers didn't take her seriously. Neighbors had started filing complaints against her. Her credibility was crumbling. She was alone. And that's when I delivered the final blow. I confronted her at the ranch, in front of the family, in front of neighbors who had gathered after hearing the commotion. I held up the inheritance papers, the evidence of her fraud, the proof of her lies. She tried to scream, tried to twist the story, but no one listened. Her empire was gone, her power evaporated, and I looked her in the eyes and said, "You sold what wasn't yours. You tried to erase my legacy, but legacies don't die. They fight back." She broke down, trembling, humiliated, exposed. That was my revenge, not through courts, not through police, but through fear, exposure, and reclaiming what was mine. The ranch is mine again. The family left, understanding they had been deceived. Neighbors turned against Karen, stripping her of her HOA crown. She vanished, moving away, leaving behind whispers of her downfall. And me? I walk the fields now, free, proud, unbroken. The land is mine, the legacy restored. But I don't forget. I don't forgive. Because Karen taught me something, that evil doesn't always come with guns or knives. Sometimes it comes with clipboards and fake smiles. Sometimes it hides behind rules and paperwork. And when it does, you don't fight it with lawyers. You fight it with fire. My grandfather's voice echoes in my head every time I look at the fields. Protect what's yours. Never bow, never beg. I didn't bow. I didn't beg. I took back what was mine. And Karen, she'll never forget the night the ranch rejected her, the night her empire crumbled, the night she realized legacies don't die. They fight back.
Karen's retreat from the ranch that stormy night should have been the end, but I knew better. People like her don't vanish quietly. They linger, they plot, they wait for weakness, and I wasn't about to give her that chance. Every day I worked the land, but every night I sharpened my mind, replaying her smirk, her arrogance, her threats. She had stolen from me once, and though I had reclaimed the ranch, I wanted her to feel the weight of every lie she had ever told. Revenge wasn't finished, it was evolving. I began to haunt her world in ways she couldn't trace. At the grocery store, she'd find her car door scratched with the same boundary symbols my grandfather used. At HOA meetings, anonymous envelopes appeared on tables filled with copies of her fraudulent transactions. Neighbors whispered louder now, no longer afraid. She walked into rooms and felt eyes burning into her, suspicion dripping from every glance. She tried to fight back, tried to rally her followers, but her empire was dust. And I watched, silent, patient, savoring every crack in her facade. But Karen wasn't just arrogant, she was desperate, and desperation makes people reckless. One evening I saw her sneaking back toward the ranch, flashlight in hand, muttering to herself. She thought she could find something, papers, loopholes, leverage. She thought she could claw her way back into power. I followed her silently, footsteps masked by the crunch of gravel. She entered the barn, shining her light across the walls, searching. That's when I spoke from the shadows. "Looking for ghosts, Karen?" She froze, the beam trembling in her hand. "You don't belong here," I continued, stepping closer, my voice low, steady, unrelenting.
This land rejected you, and so will every place you touch. Her breath quickened, her eyes darted, but she couldn't move. Fear had rooted her to the ground. I didn't raise a hand. I didn't need to. My presence was enough. She dropped the flashlight, stumbled backward, and fled into the night, her scream swallowed by the wind. From that moment, Karen unraveled. She stopped attending meetings, stopped walking the streets with her clipboard. Neighbors saw her curtains drawn, her lights off, her car unmoved. Rumors spread. Some said she was sick, others said she was hiding. But I knew the truth. She was haunted. Not by ghosts, not by police, but by me. By the legacy she tried to erase. And I wasn't done. I wanted her to feel the same helplessness she forced on others. So I made sure she did. Every week another reminder appeared, her mailbox stuffed with copies of her own lies, her phone ringing with silence at midnight, her garden marked with the same symbols she once mocked. She lived in paranoia, jumping at shadows, flinching at whispers. And that was my revenge. Not violence, not blood, but fear that never left her. Meanwhile, the ranch thrived. I rebuilt the barn, restored the fences, planted crops that stretched across the fields. Neighbors who once bowed to Karen now came to me, helping, rebuilding, sharing stories of resilience. The ranch became more than soil and wood. It became a symbol of defiance, of justice, of what happens when you refuse to bow to corruption. Every sunrise painted the fields gold. Every sunset whispered my grandfather's words, "Protect what's yours, never bow, never beg." And I had done just that. I hadn't begged the courts, hadn't bowed to the police, hadn't surrendered to her lies. I fought back, not with fists, not with guns, but with patience, precision, and fear. And fear is the sharpest weapon of all. The final time I saw Karen was not in person, but in a photograph. A neighbor handed it to me, shaking their head. She was sitting alone on a bus stop bench, hair disheveled, eyes hollow, clutching her clipboard like it was the last piece of her identity. She looked broken, stripped of the arrogance that dripped from every word. And I realized then that my revenge was complete. Not because she had lost everything, but because she finally understood what it meant to be powerless. She'd tried to erase me, tried to steal my legacy, tried to bury my name under her empire. But in the end, she was erased, and I was the one that endured. So when the wind howls through the fields at night, when the barn creaks under the weight of memory, I hear my grandfather's voice, steady and proud. You fought back. You protected what was yours, and you won. And I whisper back into the darkness, into the soil, into the legacy that will never die. Yes, I won, and she will never forget it. Karen's disappearance from town should have been the end, but endings are never that simple. Even after she left, her shadow lingered, her name whispered like a curse in the mouths of those she had wronged. I thought reclaiming the ranch would silence the storm inside me, but the truth is, revenge doesn't end when the enemy falls. It ends when you decide it does. And I wasn't ready to let go. I wanted Karen to feel the weight of what she had done, not just once, but forever. So I made sure her downfall followed her wherever she went. Anonymous letters reached her new neighborhood, exposing her past. Her attempts to rebuild a life collapsed under the weight of suspicion. She became a ghost, drifting from place to place, never welcome, never trusted. And I knew she carried me with her, the reminder that legacies don't die, they haunt. But while Karen unraveled, the ranch flourished. The land breathed again, crops rose tall, the barn echoed with life. Neighbors who once bowed to her tyranny now stood beside me, helping, rebuilding, sharing stories of resilience. The ranch became more than soil and wood. It became a symbol of defiance, of justice, of what happens when you refuse to bow to corruption. Every sunrise painted the fields gold. Every sunset whispered my grandfather's words, "Protect what's yours, never bow, never beg." And I had done just that. I hadn't begged the courts, hadn't bowed to the police, hadn't surrendered to her lies. I fought back, not with fists, not with guns, but with patience, precision, and fear. And fear is the sharpest weapon of all. The final time I saw Karen was not in person, but in a photograph. A neighbor handed it to me, shaking their head. She was sitting alone on a bus stop bench, hair disheveled, eyes hollow, clutching her clipboard like it was the last piece of her identity. She looked broken, stripped of the arrogance that dripped from every word. And I realized then that my revenge was complete. Not because she had lost everything, but because she finally understood what it meant to be powerless. She'd tried to erase me, tried to steal my legacy, tried to bury my name under her empire. But in the end, she was erased, and I was the one that endured. So when the wind howls through the fields at night, when the barn creaks under the weight of memory, I hear my grandfather's voice, steady and proud. You fought back. You protected what was yours, and you won. And I whisper back into the darkness, into the soil, into the legacy that will never die. Yes, I won, and she will never forget it.